Hello, this is Brandy.
Hey, this is your man Dave. Welcome back, guys.
Welcome to episode 11 of Relationships and Family Matters.
Relationships.
Yes. In our last episode, in episode 10, we talked all about the kids. We talked about how my kids are always, or I should say our kids. Our kids are always.
My kids, okay.
Our kids are always on
Listen,
my mind.
audience, y'all heard that.
Our kids,
okay.
Even though they
Do
are.
I need to take a DNA test?
No, I don't think that'll be necessary.
That was slip. They just slipped out?
They look like you.
Okay.
So, but they're always on my mind. Even now that they're older, there's always something going on that, they're never far from my thoughts. But I wanted to talk more about relationships and kids and how kids, two things. How kids affect relationships, and we kind of touched on that before.
We touched on that a little bit.
And how relationships affect kids. That's profound, isn't it?
Yes, relationships in a marriage or dating situation, how that affects the kids.
And how kids affect relationships. So let's start with the first one.
Okay.
How relationships are affected by kids. When kids come into the situation, when they're born into a relationship, how does the relationship change?
How does it change, or how does it affect the relationship?
Well, yes,
okay.
Both.
Okay, well, I would think it changed the relationship because I think a lot of your attention is drawn toward that child. So,
right.
So a lot of the back and forth to him or her may not be, a little bit less, because a lot of your attention is directed toward the child.
So you're saying the relationship itself, the husband and wife will just say, you don't have the time to spend with each other,
yes,
like you did before the child was born.
And that's what we talked about the last episode 10. We talked about if you're having issues then
in your relationship,
that doesn't really help when you're having a child.
Exactly.
But that's a whole nother conversation. But
right.
In perspective to what you're saying, yes, it will affect the relationship between husband and wife or partners. So a lot of your attention is going to be drawn toward the kids. So the communication is probably a little bit less, because you're not talking as much. You're talking about the child.
Yes.
You're not talking about each other. So that sometimes, the relationship itself, because that's why, let me go back. Well, that's why you see a lot of relationships kind of die, because once the kids get older and out of school and they leave, you got two adult people looking at each other and like, I really don't know who you are, because the relationship, all your energy, your time, your effort, your resources is directed toward the kids.
Right.
And it's not, especially when they're younger, you don't have a lot of date nights and relationship trying to get your parents or the partner's relationship stronger, because all your energy is going toward the kids. And
that's why you have to be intentional. You have to make a special effort. Special effort towards having date night and having time for yourself. And I know that it's hard.
You are very particular with that. Yes.
Yes, I was. And it's hard. I was when they were little, and I am currently. Now that they're older, we don't have to worry about it as much. But I think you have to be more intentional about it when they're younger.
Yes.
Especially, well, I was going to say if you have more than one, but even one, you need to have that. You need to schedule that time almost. And the thing that would happen with ours, I know a lot of times, we would schedule time because, like, our church would have a parents' night out, or one of the churches in the area would have parents' night out.
Or the YMCA used to have time out.
Yes, or we would even hire a babysitter.
Yeah, we've done that
before. What would happen, someone would get sick. I mean, one child would get sick, and then we couldn't go. The other child would get sick, and we couldn't go. So plans would change. We just have to be flexible and have to be real intentional intentional about making time for ourselves.
Yeah, but to answer your question, I think we both are saying that you have to intentionally make time as a couple. You
Yes,
need
that's
to spend,
literally what I just said.
I'm saying you have to, and a lot of times you say, well, we will do it next week. You have to plan that next week date because anything can happen. You have to schedule it, put it down, have a babysitter, and hopefully you guys have some support,
or family
support. You know, in your area that maybe your mom, your dad, your in-laws, whoever can keep the baby for a while, so you guys can maybe go on a date night, which is always helpful for a relationship.
And I like to, as you know, I like to make reservations at a restaurant. I don't.
So you won't have to sit and wait. So you know your time is
making the most of our time. We're not sitting there waiting for a table for an hour, and then we're rushing through dinner.
Yeah, because if you don't make reservations, you're going to wait. You're going to go there, have to wait an hour.
You're going to have to wait.
Then you're going to,
and then you get mad and you go somewhere else, and you're going to have to wait just as long. So it's that's just a vicious cycle. So yes, be intentional. But I wanted to ask you, what are some things that you felt like you did differently after you had kids? Now, let me give you a couple of examples what I felt like I did differently after we had kids. I tried to be a safer driver myself, honestly. I would look back and see my child back there, and I wanted to drive better. We also, another thing that we had to do while you're thinking, we had to get another car. We had to get a bigger car.
Yes, because I had a little Honda Accord hatchback, so we
stick shift.
Yes, stick shift.
Which
so
I could not drive. That's an automatic. That's a manual
transmission. So we had to, but we kept that car. We just had to get a car that was a little bit set up a little bit higher.
Mm-hmm. And your car was two-door
car. So
conducive for a car seat. Conducent.
Oh, conducive. Okay.
Or conducive. Yeah, okay. You're right. Conducive may be the word.
For the family. So after a while, we had to get a new car. So we decided to if we're going to buy a new car, we're going to need this for a while. So we're going to have this car for a while. So we went out and bought a nice SUV.
Yes.
That was fit maybe 6 people at the time.
It seats 7, I believe.
7. Okay, 7 people. So
we still have it. So.
We still have it. So there are certain things that change, your values change, your the way you use your money, and the driving. Unfortunately, I still kind of drive the same.
We won't get into that. But I made a conscious effort to drive better. I know we had to buy another car. We eventually got a much bigger house.
A much bigger house.
We were in a 2-bedroom, 2-bath, 2-bedroom, 1.5-bath. house. So we ended up getting a much larger house. We wanted a big yard. There was so much we wanted for our family, for our kids. So those were investments, financial. We talked about that in the last episode. Really consider those finances.
Exactly. But some things you do change as when you become brand new parents. The way you used to think was a little bit different. The way you spend your time and resources.
Right.
But yeah, we decided to invest in a different car.
Yes.
Driving habits are a little bit different because you're not driving for yourself anymore. You're driving for your kids. The kids are in the car. But yeah, several things change.
I would say our vacations changed because, say, before we had kids, we might decide to go at the last minute. We're going to go drive down to Atlanta for a couple of nights. We're going to go do this for a few nights. Spur of the moment kind of things.
Well, you can't do that when you have kids.
Exactly. So we changed our thinking about travel. You don't go and hang out in Vegas for a week when you have kids.
No,
you don't. There's certain things that you don't do. You end up going to Disney and you go to the beach and those kind of kid-friendly places.
Well, I think when you have kids, you want them to have the same or better experiences that you had. So you tend to do things, you want them to be exposed to things that you might not have gotten exposed to when you were younger. So yeah, you take that Disney, you take the kids to the beach. You want them to, you go to. We used to go to the. Oh my God, I can't. Some of the museums. I'm sorry, not museums. Go to the zoo. We went to a couple of
the
zoos.
zoo.
Yeah,
Yes,
I'm sorry.
we did
went to
go
several
to
zoos.
We did go to
Yeah,
the
we
zoo a
just
lot.
we went to the zoo a lot.
Local zoo, and then
the
others.
aquariums. We used to take the kids to the. I actually
That's
had
right.
I had a membership to the aquarium and the zoo. But like I said, you don't. As they age, your priorities change just a little bit, and
Right.
okay, they don't really like the zoo anymore, so you move to the next phase, and
You
move to the
cater
next phase.
to what their needs are at the time, and
At the time, you do it until they're up to
until that
grown.
changes,
Yes.
and then you. What about stability? Don't you feel like you?
Well,
there
stability
was more,
is there. Well, we talked about gender roles. A lot of guys, when it comes to, comes to the baby and their role as a husband or a father, a lot of times they allow the mother to do all the change clothes, change the clothes, take care of the baby, wiping the baby. But I think a lot of guys
cooking and cleaning.
but I think a lot of guys today are more inclined to be able to do those things. They are willing to do those things.
When was the last meal you cooked?
Well, I
Dave?
wouldn't say necessarily cook. I guess it's more of a taking care of the family.
Okay.
Taking care. I think a lot of guys.
When you say taking care of your family, I understand because you're a hard worker, and I would say something. Well, it didn't necessarily change, but you work. You want to work just as hard to provide for your family. And you probably maybe even looked at changing jobs to find a job that, maybe you were at a job and you liked it, but the pay wasn't good. I'm not talking about you personally. I'm just saying someone in general. Maybe they had a job that they just enjoyed, but the pay wasn't great. But then when they knew that they were about to have kids, really had to step up and find something that paid better, had better benefits. Maybe their commute wasn't as long. They needed to be closer to home. So those
that's
things you
something
take
that
into
you
consideration.
have to take in consideration when you're having kids. Because if you're driving an hour to work or an hour and a half from work to work each day, that's 3 hours of your day
Away
in the car.
from
So
your
you may
family.
have to say, can I find something a little bit closer, or maybe do we need to move? Or do I need to find something with some better insurance? I really love this job. I really love what I do. It's been my lifelong dream. But does it actually support my family and what my kids going to need in the future? So, yeah, there may be a time that you need to pivot to something that's a little bit more stable. All those decisions that you do need to consider when you're getting ready to have a child or you have a child. I think all those are very important that you need to do.
And so let's talk about the second point I wanted to bring up, and that I mentioned. How do relationships affect kids? So we talked about how kids affect relationships, but how do relationships affect kids? There can be, kids can be a product of a good relationship and a stable relationship, whether parents are married or not, and end up being good, well-adjusted people who can provide for themselves.
Sure.
But also
on the flip side,
people can come from
a great family,
abusive or dysfunctional family.
Yes,
and still turn out well.
Yeah.
Or they could turn out bad. I mean, relationships can affect.
Well, I wouldn't say bad.
Kids.
I think a lot of people, when they come from abusive, like I said their father was very abusive to their mother, or vice versa, because that can happen. A lot of times, that does bring a little bit of baggage to their relationship. But a lot of times, there's some great counselors out there that I would recommend if you're dealing with some things that happen in your childhood. A lot of people do. A lot of people deal with stuff that happened when they were a child. If it was sibling rivalry, or mother and daughter bad relationship, father and son bad relationship, or father abused daughter. I mean, anything can happen, but a lot of those things happen in families. A lot of times, people don't talk about it, but it does happen, and a lot of times people have to grow up and adjust mentally in their minds, because I mean, a lot of the time they carry that with them to their graves.
They can carry that with them. Those abusive relationships can cause it can be very detrimental.
Yes,
to
very
a
much.
child, to a teen, to an adult. But you hear about people not overcoming those things. You hear and then they end up, on drugs or being mentally ill. But then you hear
Abusive
yes,
themselves.
abusive themselves.
Yeah.
I call that like a generational curse when they
Yeah.
see it as a child. They grow up with it, and then they end up repeating the same behavior. And hopefully that chain or that behavior can be broken, and
it can be
modified.
Like I said, I would always suggest to anyone that is suffering from childhood trauma, I would always suggest that they go and see a counselor.
I agree.
Or
And
a psychiatrist, whatever, someone to really get that out, because keeping it in doesn't help.
Right.
Keeping it in doesn't. It's always good to talk. Even if you're upset with your spouse, a lot of times you need to stop and have a conversation with her or him, whoever you need to do to get that out. It really helps. So,
And I would suggest doing that away from the children, going in the room, having those date nights.
So what do you mean?
Like
Yeah.
if you're upset and you need to have a conversation, it may turn loud, it may turn I'm not saying anyone's going to hit each other, but if you're going to be yelling and screaming, sometimes you need to take that away from the children, because children, especially when they're little, they're like
their
little
brains are like
microphones.
little microphone.
Not microphones, but like little recorders, because they hear things, they repeat things, and some things you don't want to hear your child repeat.
Yeah, and their brains are like sponges. They retain that information, and people say, well, you may say, oh, that was just nothing. But if you're arguing in front of your spouse, yeah, if you're arguing in front of your spouse and the kids see it, excuse me,
okay, with your spouse,
yes. And your kids are seeing that, that's really not, I wouldn't recommend that. That's not a good look for the child, because that information that they're like, okay, they're seeing something that is a little bit different from normal.
Mm-hmm.
Then they may think it's normal. They may think, it's okay to do something, or especially if you're physical with each other, you just can't do that. That is unacceptable in front of a child.
Right. But you do hear some success stories.
Oh, absolutely.
You hear about, I don't know why, just
many of
the
them.
top of my mind, I think of Tyler Perry.
Yeah.
I know that he had been through some terrible things. I think he said he was abused by his stepfather. He lived in his car. And then he just turned out to be, I think he's a billionaire now. I'm not 100% sure, but very wealthy. He turned out very successful despite his upbringing. And you hear about, success stories where people have gone through. Oprah Winfrey went through some abuse. And so you know that people can overcome those things and be successful, but it doesn't happen all the time,
It doesn't happen all the time. I think sometimes you have to be a little headstrong when it comes to that. You have to recognize, what your demons in the past, and kind of accept them and talk about them. But just, keeping them inside is really not the best way to deal with it. I think a lot of people have overcome certain
and
abuses.
It's funny that I should bring both of those people up, because I was thinking about how relationships affect kids, and I brought up Tyler Perry and Oprah Winfrey, and then I thought sometimes when people go through these types of things, it makes them not want to get married. When they've had a rough upbringing and abusive situations, and neither one of them are married. Oprah's not married, even though she's been with Stedman for years. Tyler Perry's not married. I think he has a girlfriend and a child now. And then you think about how, if you really think about having little kids and making sure that they have a good upbringing, so that they don't one day end up feeling like, no, I'm not, I can't have a good relationship. I can't get married. I have this fear of commitment because of what I saw my parents do.
I think that's a lot of, and sometimes they don't recognize that. They won't, it's not something that
It
they think
doesn't
about. It
register.
doesn't register to them, but that's really what's happening internally because something happened in their past. They have a lot of trauma, and they just not necessarily physically acknowledging what happened, and it's being present in their relationship today.
May not even realize that that's affected them.
And fair commitment
in
is
that way.
part of childhood abuse. You know.
All right, Dave. Well, thank you. It's been a good topic.
Yes, it has, and maybe we can do a little bit more on that.
I think we will. You can reach out to us. Give us a call, 615-930-1251. You can email us at brandyanddavidpodcast@gmail.com. All right, Dave. Thanks a lot.
Take care, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.